excited to talk about politics, campaigns, and how they impact your life, how you can be involved in them, how you can know. I'm going to be kind of a set up. We're working on it, and if we get it, we'll switch over to that. But regardless of that, I wanted this to be an open conversation, so if you have questions or comments or thoughts, please chime in at any time. It should be an interactive session, no right answers to most of any political questions. So I'm excited to have a discussion. As the professor said, I have run campaigns in Florida, Connecticut, all over the country, and I was the executive director of the South Carolina Democratic Party, charged with ensuring that our candidates have ballot access, that we fielded a full slate of candidates for offices from very small offices as county clerks, county executives in tiny 10,000 person counties, to fielding two U.S. Senate candidates in the 2014 cycle, as well as a gubernatorial campaign there. Most recently, Senator Blumenthal's campaign captured 16% more of the vote than any other candidate for statewide office in the state of Connecticut. So I wanted to start off just talking about the basics of campaigns and how they get started, how candidates are selected. At the very low level, a candidate chooses to get in, and there's typically ballot access issues, which range in difficulty. When I got started on Kendrick Beek's campaign, Kendrick chose to access the ballot by petition, which nobody's ever done and hasn't been done since in Florida history, which required 112,476 signatures by Florida registered voters. So we went around the state and gathered those. Every campaign is required to do something. Sometimes it's as simple as paying a filing fee. Sometimes it's more complicated, such as getting 112,000 signatures. But that's the most basic thing a candidate has to do to get in. Typically, it's achievable, but it requires you to show that you have a seriousness of purpose and planning and support within the community, whether that be a local district or statewide operation. Second, there are sometimes party qualifying standards. In the state of South Carolina, everything runs through the local parties. In other states, it's different, but you need to go approach your local party operation, whether that's your county, your town, or your statewide party, to make sure that you're qualified to be on their ballot. Moving forward, a key component of campaigns is making sure that you're qualified to run. Typically, that's a residency requirement. It's pretty simple, but you want to make sure that you establish that. And then moving into the kind of core aspects of campaigns, I have a few key principles that I use when I'm running campaigns. That is, campaigns are about differences, especially primary campaigns. And so when you're focused on a primary campaign, you need to make sure that what you're saying to voters is different than what the other candidates say. In a primary campaign, people tend to agree. There's not a lot of difference between one candidate and the other. And that difference is what's going to decide the election. The key goal of any campaign is to make sure you know what a voter is going to do as well as you can when they enter the ballot box. When they go into that ballot booth and they cast their vote, you don't want uncertainty, because that means you haven't done your job. If they go one way or the other, you haven't done your job. You have not established a message or compelling argument to that voter on why they should vote for you versus anybody else. And so what in a campaign you need to do is create a distinction between your opponents. Whether that is a friendly distinction or a complete opposite. If you oppose, that's an easy one to make when the other person supports an issue. But in a primary, you're much closer. And so what you need to do is not focus on where you're the same, but rather draw out that distinction and show why it's important. And that's my second thing. You need to connect with voters. Too many people in campaigns talk these issues that really do not matter to voters, but what they do wrong is they don't focus on the things that people care about. You watch elections, you watch campaigns, there's constantly these issues that come up that are process issues. Whether that's how much money a person raised, that's important in how you deliver your message and how you're able to. But voters typically don't care about that. But every newspaper loves to write the story one supporter on how much people raise. What people care about is how you're impacting them. And in my view, that's where you need to focus your efforts. If you are not making a connection with those voters, you haven't done anything to tell them how you're going to change their life. That's the most important thing in campaigns. Thirdly, I think you need to be authentic. I've seen campaigns across the country, if you're looking for an example, after we're done here, go and Google John Gordon's, big John Gordon ad from 2008, I believe, in which they have a country western song about this guy who just is a country western and comes out completely inauthentic. What you need to do when you're approaching voters is really connect with them at their level and with who you are. If you're coming across and you're trying to fake a southern accent or pretend to be something you're not, voters will sniff that out immediately. And so I think one of the core aspects in connecting with voters is just being yourself. People tend to, if you're running for office, people should like you. That's a core aspect of winning. And so you need to make sure that what you're doing does not make people think that you're lying or misrepresenting yourself. That comes up in elections all the time. There's a problem for Hillary Clinton in 2016, as opposed to Donald Trump. Everybody believed he was being exactly who he was, and that resonated with a lot of people. People thought Hillary was somehow putting on airs or presenting a false face, and that didn't matter. Regardless of what you think, it's a pretty basic assessment of one of the core aspects of the 2016 election. Additionally, you need to make sure that everything you're doing is working towards the end goal. The end goal being winning your and too many people get caught up in small items. There's a lot of distractions in the campaign. There are a lot of things that come up that people want you to focus on, want you to talk about, want to bring you into, that really don't happen. These conversations happen all over the place, and if you ever wanted a better example, go online to a forum, to an online news site, and then start reading the comments on these articles. The people who are posting are exceptionally passionate. They are very, very committed to those issues, but they are not the average voter. The average voter does not go online and post into comment sections. I always try to get my candidates not to read comment sections, not to respond to those sort of things, because if you're doing that, you're missing the vast, vast majority of the voting population. And so my focus in all these campaigns is to avoid that voice, that offender. And that comes to issues, it comes to things that people just don't care about. What you need to be focused on are the issues that are impacting people's lives on a daily basis. In my 2015 race with Lou Broman, there were a ton of issues. And we did considerable research on what mattered to people, and we found it was crime. The city was in the middle of a crime wave that was really impacting. It was the most murders in any New England city. Despite being one of the smaller, mid-sized cities, much smaller than Boston, it had more murders than Boston. It had more murders per capita than almost any city other than Chicago in the country. And so we looked into the data and found, despite the city's high tax rate, the highest in Connecticut by about 2 to 1, what people actually cared about was the fact that murders were rising up and up and up over the course of that year. And so early on in that campaign, we began talking about crime. There were 4 candidates in the race when we started talking about crime. No one else was willing to talk about it at the same time. We were willing to get out there, start having honest conversations, engaging voters. We held a town forum when the mayor's office refused to hold a town forum on crime. We thought in this city of 125,000, we were going to get 20 to 40 people. And we thought it was an important conversation that had to happen. It turned out 250 came out to us. It was far more important to people than we even realized at that time. And so when we started talking about crime and we started drilling down, we found that people knew what you had to do. The crime wave in Hartford was because there weren't enough jobs and our schools were terrible. And everybody in Hartford knew that the solution was better jobs and better schools and more jobs. And so as we started bringing that message out, despite the mayor's personal favorability being about 70% in the Democratic primary, we were able to focus people on the issue that really mattered to them, which was crime, and better schools and more jobs. And people knew that that was the right answer because we had spent the time to talk to them. So we just kept focusing on that while everybody else was trying to talk about other issues that nobody cared about. These small issues such as small scandals involved with spending in the city of Hartford's mayoral office. It was an important issue, and there shouldn't be corruption, there shouldn't be misuse of city money, but people just weren't responding to it. It wasn't as important as keeping your children safe when there's 27 murders by May in a city of that size. So, driving towards that core goal and making sure that you are not pulled off your message is one of the most important things. Okay. I want to pause for a moment, if that's all right, and just see if there's any questions or comments you want to have or topics you want to cover.
What do you think of like Roger Stone and his tactics and political campaigns?
So, Roger Stone is a very interesting character. Roger Stone is a political consultant. He was an early advisor to Donald Trump's presidential campaign, but he came to fame and power in the 1960s and 70s advising Richard Nixon's campaign. He kind of became a boogeyman of sorts in that era. And he formed a firm that is, and I'm going to reverse the order of these names, but it was Manafort, Atwater Stone, and one other that I'm blanking, Black, I believe. And you may recognize at least two other names in there. Manafort, who's obviously in the news very much right now, with his indictment of recent and his campaign chairmanship of Donald Trump's presidential campaign. And also Lee Atwater, who was the Republican National Committee chair in the early 90s, and George H.W. Bush's campaign manager. He passed away back then. But to your point, I think that Roger Stone and Lee Atwater are very, very interesting people, and they're very similar. You don't know Lee Atwater as well these days because he died, but he was famous for knowing how to take issues that people cared about and really dive into them, and also was probably the first purveyor of dog whistle politics. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing with Roger Stone too. That Lee Atwater said, to paraphrase, that in a prior era you were able to be overtly racist, and that appealed to people. Certain segments of the population, but that started to turn a different tide, and you had to be more subtle. And so we said that you had to start focusing on states' rights and taxes and welfare state. Some of the issues that you're seeing the Republican Party talk a lot about these days, as a way to continue to rile up a certain segment of the population. I think that Roger Stone is doing that in a very modern way. I think that he knows there is this segment of the population that absolutely believes these things and needs to kind of hear an alternative voice. I think that that's his connection with WikiLeaks is an effort to really kind of get under the skin of a core segment of the population. And I think he's, unfortunately, in my opinion, very good at it. Any other? Yes,
What do you do if the candidate who wants to hire you is diametrically opposed to your ideas? They're from West Virginia and they support coal mining, where they're from North Carolina and their job base is based on tobacco, and they want you to see those as the issues that connect with voters, so people will vote for them to continue coal mining. But you're an environmentalist and you don't see that. How do you respond to that?
So, first up, I'm a Democratic political operative. I work for Democratic campaigns. There are very few people who switch parties. In part, it's a trust and relationship thing. I don't know many Republican candidates, so there aren't that many who are offering me jobs. Additionally, it's a strategy thing. How you appeal to Republican voters is different. There are different messages that resonate. There are different strategies. For instance, in many states, Republican voters are much more rural, and so just logistically, it's harder to knock a street way out of the country where you're separated a mile, whereas in the city, you knock on every door if you could. But to get to more the heart of your point, I have core values that I believe in, that I won't contradict. I work for the candidates who support those. However, I also believe, there are different policies that are right for different states, that are right in different parts of the country, and I understand there has to be a spectrum. There's not one right Democrat or one right Republican. There is this spectrum, and so two issues that we may disagree slightly on, but in all reality, the economy of South Carolina, North Carolina, West Virginia is entirely different than the economy of Connecticut. And so if you're working for someone, I have to agree with them on the core issues that are important to me. But I can acknowledge that what's right in Connecticut, what's right in my mind, could be slightly different in another. And so if you went against a very core value of mine, I would work for you. However, there is some spectrum of all the issues, and I need to know that you're the right person who's going to do the right thing and make the decisions that I would theoretically agree with in the tough choice, because it's a representative democracy and not a direct democracy. So I'm like, somebody I trust. Awesome. Thank you. That's great. So, because we didn't have this up at the beginning, I'm a little bit out of sequence, but these are some of the campaigns. Before I kind of hop into some of the PowerPoint, are there any other questions?
What are your go-to resources in documentation?
How do you mean?
Like, how you talked about like the core message and everything. What are your go-to resources to like document information?
Yeah. So when I started in politics at lower levels, I was not the first hire. I was hired a little bit into the campaign, and typically there's enough out there. On larger campaigns, for instance, U.S. Senate and such, there'd be a wealth of information out there, whether it's on the campaign website or in the media, print, TV, otherwise. But as I moved along, and typically am the first hire or one of the first hires, it's a conversation with the candidate. Sitting down and having a long meeting, because essentially you become a part of the candidate's family. I spend 100 hours a week typically working when I'm a campaign manager, and see the candidate for 50 hours a week. We sit in the same room all day, every day, and there's disagreement on issues that'll come out. If there's disagreement in personality, it'll come out. So you really just have to, and so that's true. If you're earlier in your career on smaller campaigns, city council, that sort of campaign, it's entirely reasonable and probably expected to sit down and have a good rapport with the candidate, both on issues and personality. Any other?
So every city, every individual has different needs, and so like Phoenix needs have different needs and make them. So my question is, how do you win, or what's the difference between trying to win between rural voters, out in the middle of nowhere, and then like urban voters for people in the city? So it sounds like you did a lot of urban.
I've done both. I mean, South Carolina is a very rural state for the most part. I worked in North Florida, which is the entire panhandle. I did from Daytona Beach all the way to Pensacola, and a lot of that's farm, a lot of that's rural, a lot of that's military work. And then I've also done interstate work in Hartford, which is a very dense city center. And to that, I would say, you got to look at, there are core values, there are accepted values, that are, shared between them. And there are easy answers to some of those questions, and then tough. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in the country or the city, most people want better schools. Most people don't think their schools are good enough. That's an important issue. And so you can find those shared ones, but then you also have to address the differences. If you had a district that was both Mesa and Tempe or Phoenix, and you were trying to do it, you have to acknowledge that there are differences. You have to also find where your vote is. It's entirely possible your vote center is in Phoenix, and you need to go after that, somewhat to the detriment of Mesa or a smaller, less urban community, because your vote is democratic and densely populated in the city, and that's where you're well known, that's where you're well liked, that's where your vote's going to come from. And so sometimes you have to focus your efforts there and focus the message on what will work there, and leave space at somebody else. So in the last few years, there's been a lot of conversations about voting rights, voter access, the ability to cast your ballot fairly and to be represented fairly. And so I wanted to address some of the impediments to fair representation. First being voter suppression, which is efforts to decrease turnout, to keep people from voting, keep people from casting their opinion or getting involved in the political system, and thereby being represented. The second is voter disenfranchisement, which is really just the out-and-out disenfranchisement, the removal of a person or a group of people from the voting and participation system and representation. And then gerrymandering, which is a systemic issue designed to draw districts that do not accurately represent the community that they're supposed to represent, whether that's a town, a city, a state. And then finally, voter fraud, which I would like to point out, and I will address later, is an exceptionally rare thing in the American political system. Exceedingly rare. The first three issues are real and things that we need to be worried about. The fourth, voter fraud, is something we need to work to prevent, but need to be very careful that we do not have any unintended consequences through our efforts to prevent voter fraud. So, starting with voter suppression. The goal of voter suppression is to remove somebody or a group of people from participating in the system. Now, there are a few different examples of this. Barriers to registration. It could be very difficult in your community to register to vote. There could be something that you need to do or provide that is more difficult to get. Voter ID laws. If you don't have access to proper ID, it could prevent you from voting in some states. That is important to about 32 states in this country. The location and number of polling places, which can affect both your access to the ability to place the vote and the time. The cost of voting, which is not a literal cost, although in some cases it is, but in terms of time, in terms of getting to the polling location, whether that's you need to take a bus or a train or light rail or a car, or you need to arrange for time off work and you lose money that way. All of that is disinformation, which is the presentation of information that's just fundamentally wrong. It happens commonly in campaigns. You'll see people put out flyers that say, due to high turnout, Democrats vote on Wednesday, Republicans vote on Tuesday. Democrats show up on Wednesday, no one's there to vote. To take your vote. So all of the people who got tricked by that didn't get to cast a ballot. It's simpler too. People will send out mailers that say, here's your polling location. That's not your polling location. You go to the wrong spot. You'll lose that opportunity to vote. Intimidation. This is very common practice, especially against minority communities across the country. You'll see it happen a lot in states where there's highly competitive elections. When I was working in 2008 in Michigan on the top targeted congressional campaign in the country, there was a group of Texas Minutemen from the coalition that's guarding the border who drove all the way up to Michigan and stood outside polling locations where there were a lot of Hispanic voters just filming to create the impression that they were there to oversee, supervise, report, which was designed to intimidate. We had to dispatch lawyers in an attempt to get them removed. Purging of voter rolls, which is the removal of people who from voter rolls. It's famous. It happened in Florida, where they removed, I forget, I think it was 500,000 people from the voting rolls with really loose requirements on matching it up. In Florida, you're not allowed to vote if you're a felon unless you've been granted your rights back by the government. And they, if your name was John Smith and there was a John J. Smith who had committed a felony, they would theoretically remove that. It happened to a lot of people. It removed a lot of those in 2000, as didn't happen. And then illegal interference with campaigns. This is really when you get in the way of helping, a campaign that was trying to help somebody vote or trying to get their people out to vote. It happened in New Hampshire in 2006. when the Democratic headquarters got bombarded by calls from robocalls that were just hanging up, thus blocking all of their phone lines, and so they couldn't call and remind people to vote. Commonly see tires on cars slashed or vans that transport people to polls. You see a variety of different ways to interfere with other campaigns or turnout efforts. So, this is some information about voter ID laws. There are 32 states that have a form of voter ID. That ranges from strict to non-strict, requested and required. And the problem with this, if you look, you see Arizona's in the strict non-photo ID standard category on this. This is according to NCSL, the National Conference of State Legislatures. And the problem with this is there is demographics that are more likely to not have proper IDs. This is an example from Wisconsin, and at the top left and top right, you'll see respectively the percentage of white men and white women who have a don't have a valid driver's license, which is colored tie. Whereas in the middle row is African American men and African American women, and the bottom is Hispanic men and Hispanic women. And so you'll see very clearly that one of the problems with voter ID laws is they can be used to systematically make it harder for people to vote. Additionally, there's a cost associated with getting an ID. Most of these states are required to have a no-cost option, but we all have gone and gotten our driver's license, and that costs $25 or $45, and people have compared that to being akin to a poll tax. Additionally, there's differences in what IDs are accepted. For instance, in Texas, a gun permit is accepted, but a student ID isn't accepted. And so it's often used to make it either used or unintentionally has the effect of minority students, the elderly, young voters, and urban voters who often don't need cars. If you live in a city and you have access to mass transit, you're much less likely to need a car. And so those are much less likely to have a valid voter ID. Number and location of polling locations. You're here in Maricopa County. Last year, they decreased the number of polling locations. I don't know how many of you tried to cast a ballot, but you may have faced very, very long lines because of that decrease. For some people, those lines are prohibitive. If you need childcare or if you have a job, that can be very difficult to be able to vote. And then voter disenfranchisement. This is really when a person is completely removed from the political system. There are a few examples, and I want to quickly. But felons in many states are not allowed to cast a ballot. Transgender people, specifically in states where you are required to have a photo ID, often the gender becomes an issue on that. And thus, there's many transgender people who are disenfranchised from their vote. Successful voter suppression, like we were just talking about, is disenfranchisement of the voter. And limits and restrictions on absentee and overseas voting also has that effect. You can't cast your ballot from overseas or a prohibitively long time for that, or that need to request a ballot so early, that can decrease and cause voter disenfranchisement. Now, gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the drawing of districts specifically designed to enable one party or one group to have an advantage in the election. I have a few examples, and what you're going to notice is the bizarrely drawn nature of these. And these are all from the 1990s Supreme Court case on voter gerrymandering. So you see this swings around and really cuts out part of Chicago here. That's Chicago right here. And here's one from Georgia, Louisiana. This is one of my favorites. And North Carolina. Swinging through. And so the effect of this is you get to draw your own districts, and when legislators and political parties are able to impact this, you can get an unrepresentative sample. So here's an example of gerrymandering. You've got 50 people, 30 of them are blue, 40 of them are red. Here's one way to cut it. This gets you perfect representation theoretically. You have 3 blue districts, 2 red districts. So 60% of your representatives are blue, 60% are red. or you cut it this way. And while these are compact, you're still getting 5 blue representatives and completely leaving the red voters out of it. And then here is the more common gerrymandering scenario in which they're drawn bizarrely in order to really pull people out. And so you see in these U-shaped districts on the right side is what's called packing, where they're putting almost all of the blue voters into one district. And so you have 20 of your blue voters in 2 districts, leaving only 10 for the other 3 districts, and getting you 3 red districts and 2 blue districts. This is in practice. In 2012, Democrats received 50.5% of the votes in North Carolina U.S. House races. However, Republicans got 9 out of 13 districts. And this is how you do it. You'll see these, District 12, swinging from Charlotte here, all the way up and in. And then this District 4 and District 3. District 12 and District 4 have subsequently been deemed illegally drawn and have been redrawn. But that's how you get to this. And then voter fraud. Despite a lot of talk about voter fraud recently, there's really very, very few instances of it. Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach did a staunch voter ID to prevent fraud proponent. Investigated 84 million votes in 22 states and found 1 in 3.8 million ballots cast were cast illicitly. In comparison, a 2014 government GAO report found that Kansas's voter registration laws caused 1.9 to 2.2% of the Kansas electorate to not vote that year. So that impacted hundreds of thousands of people. Wow. He found, I believe it was 21 instances in 84 million votes. Okay. So, how to ensure fair representation? 1, remove the legislative bodies and partisan committees from the districting process. Arizona's actually done this. They have an independent commission. It became an issue a few years back, but it was upheld. And it's actually drawn some of the fairest districts in the country. That works. There's experiments with computerized generation of those districts. Then simplify voter registration laws. People should have access to be able to register to vote, and your voter registration card, in my opinion, should be sufficient proof that you are eligible to vote. In some states, that's not the case. So I believe in broadening and eliminating voter ID laws. I think that you should make voter perception a felony. This isn't common. It does exist, it does happen. New Hampshire in 2013 made it a felony to falsely inform somebody of the election day or misrepresent wherever somebody's polling location was, and it was a good step forward. And then ensure equal and fair access to voting locations and election resources, making sure that everybody, that one town, county, district is not deprived of resources such as polling machines. This was a problem in Downsville in Florida that came up because the machines were so old they were backed up with the chats that people so frequently talk about, and that's what caused many of the problems down in South Florida that led to such a long recount. So we've kind of done the next section, so I'm going to skip off this and open this back up. I don't think we have a ton of time left, so now that I've gotten to that, are there any questions or things you would like to talk about?
I'd like to ask about the polarization that happened during our federal election, presidential election. Because right now we're like really parading ourselves into the polarization process, and I feel like we're only getting worse. So do you think there's a way we can like reverse this, or do you think it's going to continue to be a situation?
The American political system has ways of correcting, but they tend to happen in dramatic fashion with partisan realignments. I think you're seeing, we are getting more polarized. I think that modern campaigns play to that, as I spoke to earlier. I think that what you're starting to see, though, is some fractures within each party. that are pushing towards a break in that. I think that with Jeff Flake and John McCain openly breaking with their president here, that's a pretty dramatic statement. And I think it's showing a fracture with the Republican Party. On the Democratic side, there is obviously, there was tension, and I think for some people it still remains, between Bernie voters and Hillary voters, and what those policies mean, what they support, and what the core aspects of the Democratic Party platform are. So I think you're seeing some fractures, and in previous, historically, you have seen realignments, and I think there's a chance you're seeing one right now, but I think it'll take a while to work itself out. I think in the meantime, what you're looking to move away from, I think you need people to break with their party leaders more. I think that Jeff Flake has obviously done that, and that may not be enough for him to obviously win re-election, but it does allow for there to be a more centrist and less polarized voice. If that answers your question.
With the proliferation of opposition research, and given that millennials particularly have so much of their personal and private life just out there in the ether,
Yeah.
what does that mean for candidates going forward, especially from the millennial generation? If every mistake you've ever made is now public knowledge and will be collated, researched, used against you, will only the most sterile candidates get elected?
I think it's a possibility only the most sterile get elected, but I also think that what you're going to see is a shift in what norms are. Look, in 1992, Bill Clinton was famously asked if there was marijuana. He said, yes, but I didn't inhale. It's been joked about for years. In 2004, all of the Democratic candidates admitted that they'd smoked marijuana except for Wes Clark. In 2008, Barack Obama was open about it. And now candidates support legalization of marijuana, whether it's medicinal or recreational. And so I think you see, in 20 years you saw a big swing on that. I think that it's unlikely there are going to be many candidates who have lived a completely private life and can get away with not having an embarrassing photo on social media. And I also think that those people tend to shy away from, if you, in the first 30 years of your life, didn't want to embrace, the publicity of Facebook and Twitter and Vine, whatever other social media you might use, I doubt you're going to turn on at 30 and say, now's the time, I really want to go hard into politics and put myself out there. I do think, opposition research, is an important aspect of campaigns, but I think the embarrassing things are going to become less effective.
Well, I just meant more currently, people are going back, basically judging mistakes in the past that were basically common, and now it's an issue. Now it's faux pas. So even if something that you were doing at the time that was maybe socially acceptable or even insensitive, one might say, and then it's not necessarily a bad thing, you break the law, but now you've said something insensitive, and now by today's standards, that's a disqualifier because now you're some sort of deplorable.
Yeah, I do think that will be something. I mean, I think there are degrees to that, obviously, but I think that it depends. If you were pretending that Mad Men was still the culture in 1990, as some of the stuff we're saying in the news right now, I think that will continue to probably be disqualifying. I think that some of the more minor insensitivities, maybe not, but I think that you're judged on your character, and people will see that, and it depends on your voters and whether or not they're willing to accept or forgive, and whether or not you've made the progress and shown the commitment to writing whatever was insensitive then or is insensitive now that wasn't then. Yes.
Alright, so for massive scandals, for example, Roy Moore, recent in Alabama. How would a campaign manager deal with that?
I quit. Obviously, that's not what's happening there, but that's what I would do. In terms of more, acceptable scandals that are, large, you've got to get your arms around. You've got to have a completely honest conversation with the candidate in order to know what the truth is, what's out there, is there anything more. Get in front of it. If you get caught lying in a crisis like that, it just gets so much worse. Because then it just starts to rip out over and over and over again. It's really a moment where you need to step back and make sure that you know what it is. Some people would say, distract, try to change the subject. I think that voters don't fall for that. I think that some do, but I think you've got to address it head on and be honest, or you're going to take it in the hole. And I think you've really got to be brutally honest with yourself and make sure that you're not lying to yourself or to your campaign.
In your experience, how does the ethnicity intersection how effective has that been with the vote messaging out to voters?
Intersection, how do you mean?
Like,
I think it's good. They could, be the core aspect of the candidates I work for, but I think that you need to embrace the diversity of your community. And I think that all of our communities are exceptionally diverse, and if you're not willing to be open and honest and receptive to everyone who you're trying to represent, there's no way you're going to win. Sorry.
So you did work in South Carolina and Florida, right?
Yes.
Okay, I hear, like I said, I hear you talk, like, and this really, it makes sense to what you were talking, like I said, I'm all for it, but there's still some numbers, like I said, what do you do about the numbers that are still, the problems that are still going on today? Because now, like I said, I did research on Carolina and Florida, they're the most, it's the seventh most dangerous nation in America. They like it's the 5th and 7th highest violent crime per 100,000 people. And then there's like the median income for both states is around with $46,000. Like I said, so I moved out of there when I was 14, and I still see like the same stuff that people are doing back when I was 14 that are doing, still doing now. It's nothing I'm saying. So what do you do? Like I said, you're talking, but and what you're saying is making sense, but it's nothing I'm really seeing. I gotta be honest.
So I'll talk about Hartford, and I'll talk about Tallahassee. And those are two very different communities. Are you from Florida or are you from South Carolina?
South Carolina.
Whereabouts?
Columbia.
Nice. Lived there for a couple of years. So I've worked with the mayor in both Hartford and in Tallahassee. Both have some of the highest crime rates in their state right now. In Hartford, what they're doing is they're returning to community policing. In the 70s, 80s, there was an emphasis on making sure that you had cops out of their cars and walking around, and that the same cops had the same beats, and so they were working to make relationships with the community. In the budget cuts of the 90s and the rise in violent crime in the 90s and late 80s, they started focusing on sheer numbers and arrests. And that, I think, is part of the problem you're seeing now. You've seen an overall decrease in the country, but in those cities where there is a lot of violent crime, they're still relying on 90s tactics, which treats the symptoms and not the underlying cause.
Okay, but there's common sense right there. If it wasn't working in the 90s, why in the hell would it work now? Why do you think it still work now?
Well, so I think the return to the community policing model, as opposed to the cop cars and make an arrest model is the right way to go. I don't think there aren't easy answers to this. And I'm not a policy expert. I've worked in it, and I think that there's a lot that needs to be done. But I think that a lot of it needs to be an increase in the number of voices in those conversations, because oftentimes, to some of the points that we're making here, that community is not well represented in government and in city leadership, and making sure that those voices are heard, because it's very difficult for me to go in and say, this is what's going to work in somebody else's neighborhood, right? Those neighbors, those people know what is causing the crime, whether it's drugs or the fact that there are no jobs for teens after school, or whether or not, like in Hartford, there's 27% unemployment, which is greater than the Great Depression in some of those neighborhoods. I think bringing more people into the fold, making it more representative, more inclusive, is what's going to find the solutions, but I don't know what those solutions are right now. Yes, sir.
Looking ahead to the 2020 presidential campaign, we have Hillary and Bernie. They may not be running again, or they may. What do you think it would take for, well, first, what would the Democratic Party need to do to recapture the White House? And what kind of a candidate is it going to take to do that? And who do you think that candidate might be?
Tough question. I think, Tori, we need to focus on, so first up, we need to focus on 2018. There's a lot that we can do in 2018 that needs to get done. I think that the party needs to come together, especially when you don't have Bernie or Hillary on the ticket. They're not going to be running for president. I think it's a great time for the party to come together, work together, and find common ground so that we can work together in 2020. I think that we need to make sure that our message is resonating with the full breadth of the Democratic Party. And I think that a lot of people feel left out of that on both sides of that debate. I think that there are people who think that the issues just don't represent them. I think that we need to take a moment and reflect on that. But I think that our candidate needs to be inspiring. I think they need to be motivational. I think that our party is ready for some new blood. I don't know that there's a lot of candidates getting involved. I think we need a confident, inspiring candidate. I think that across the spectrum, there's a lot of people who need that, whether it's Sherrod Brown in Ohio, or Kamala Harris in California, Cory Booker. So I think we're going to see a lot of candidates come out. I think that the primary this year is going to be a big testing ground for the candidates to see how well they resonate with voters. I think that it's going to be very important. Those first 4 primaries in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. Okay, I know that I didn't fully answer your question, but I don't know the full answer to that.
You brought up new blood. I'm seeing a lot of, again, millennials. We're going to be challenging a lot of what the parties as their platforms stand, and a lot of what they fundamentally stand for, or look to, significantly restructure how that would go. How do you, as a candidate, parse bringing change with also getting donations, like funding? Again, the political parties run a lot of these shows, and you're dependent upon their monetary support to get the message out and support you. But if you're actively bucking what they stand for and looking to change, significantly what the party might represent, how do you even get ahead if they're not even willing to? Like, you see a lot of Mitch McConnell in the senatorial fund. You see the GOP in general. If you don't fit their profile of who they think is going to win, they'll take out ads against you. So how would you, as especially a dark horse upstart, challenge that? Make that, get that money to compete on that level.
I mean, look, Bernie Sanders is a great example of this. He collected hundreds of millions of dollars in small dollar contributions. And you can look at the power of the internet going back to Howard Dean in 2004, who raised, at that point, the most money in a presidential primary ever on the Democratic side. George W. Bush had raised more on the Republican, through small dollar donations. And I think that the key on that is really, if your message, if what you're saying is as popular as you believe it to be, if it is universal as you believe it to be, then $5 at a time can add up. Or as Bernie, I think it was $37 or $27 at a time, can add up over the course of the campaign and result in millions of dollars. Money's important. It matters in campaigns, unfortunately. Some states, Connecticut has a public financing system that somewhat removes that, although you still have to raise a lot of money in order to qualify. You need to raise $250,000 in $100 increments to qualify for a governor's race, for instance. But I do think, you've seen across the country enough candidates, and I think it's the same on the Republican side that, the RNC, the NRSC, the Senate arm of the Republican Party, all support Trump, all supported Luther Strange, as did Mitch McConnell. Their PACs came out attacking Roy Moore, and Roy Moore at that time connected with Republican voters in that state better than Luther Strange, and won. And so the party, the power of the party is not as great as you think it is. And I would say that as a former ED, there was a lot of things I wish I could have done in that state party that I couldn't. So I do think there's an ability to get through that, get past the large dollar donations, and if your message is that broad, money will follow.
If you approve it, what's your take on the Justice Democrat?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Basically, the running Democrats are taking over
So, I have a few views. Corporate money really is not a huge aspect in federal elections. I've worked predominantly I've worked more in federal elections than I have in state government elections. Typically, corporate dollars are well constrained. South Carolina being an exception there, where there's no corporate limits. I think that corporations' influences are far outsized. But I think that we need to be careful on the PAC side. There are PACs that are fighting for great things. There are PACs that, victory, fighting for LGBT equality, donates money to candidates who support that. There are PACs that represent unions. There are PACs that, in an ideal world, we would involve corporate money, but some of these PACs do give a voice to candidates that wouldn't otherwise get the opportunity to get out the gate, and I really do think some of them do great work. In terms of corporate dollars, I have absolutely no problem removing corporate money from politics. I think that Citizens United has deeply impacted our electoral system in a way that really has kind of allowed corporations to come in a fashion that is not designed for our electoral system.
Yeah, so if you go like lobbying, voter suppression, gerrymandering, etc., that can be very discouraging to voters because they feel like they have less influence, less power. What do you say to convince them to stay like that against them?
I mean, I think that it's your fundamental right to vote. Even if you can't donate $1, you can vote. In almost every instance, there are, obviously, as we addressed in some instances in which it's more difficult, but we've seen the power of people voted and vote not. Order was decided by 521, I believe, votes. And I think that can change the system. If 521 people in Florida vote differently, it is entirely possible citizens connect to not make that. Because justices in 2000 to 2004, and potentially 2004 to 2008, would have been appointed by President Ford as opposed to President Bush, and would have changed that. And so I think that you've seen in many instances people exercising their right to vote fundamentally changes the way our country operates as a whole. And I think that what I would say is, even if you do nothing else, that's the most important thing, is exercising your right to vote. Whether you vote for one party, vote for the other, vote both parties, vote no party, or just blank the entire ballot, going in and making that choice is the most important thing you can do in the electoral process. But then, get involved. I've seen campaigns run with very few dollars, but the power of volunteers. Bernie Sanders' campaign didn't have $100 million at the beginning. It had a very active group of people willing to work, willing to go knock doors, and it started to take off. It started to get a little bit of momentum, and that's when the money started coming in. So I think that you as an individual have a lot of power in the political system, especially at the local level where the laws very much impact your life on a daily basis. You have a lot of power. One final question. John, you.
I'm not very intelligent on politics, but When you say that we really do have the power in our vote, more so statewide, when I watch the elections and I see the electoral votes and the way they carry as opposed to the popular vote, so really the voters that turn out, they do affect the outcome and not just those electoral votes?
I think the Electoral College has outlasted its importance or relevance to the system. And so, you're right. We saw an election in which Hillary Clinton got 2-3 million more votes and still lost by a rather large margin in the Electoral College. And so I think that that does, as a whole, does diminish your voice. And I don't think it's right. I don't think it represents the country properly because we are one country and not just a group of states, each separate. But I do think, while it diminishes it, it does not make it zero. And you're in Arizona. This is one of the critical states. I know people have said that for years that it's going to be a swing state, but it's getting there. It is getting much, much closer. And I think you're going to see Arizona become one of the most hotly contested, both by Democrats and Republicans, states in the country in the presidential race in the next, if not 4 or 8 years, is my expectation. So I think you personally, your electoral votes are going to start mattering all the more. So your vote is going to have even more importance. In closing, I just want to thank everybody for participating in this discussion. Thank you for having me. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Professor, for inviting me. Thank you to the NCC for having me. And look forward to seeing you on the campaign.